Welcome my dear students. Today in this lecture we are going to discuss directive principles of state policy. As we have already discussed in the previous lectures, fundamental rights and different fundamental rights which are enumerated in our constitution, and we have also discussed the writs issued by the Supreme Court at different points of time. So today our topic is directive principles of state policy. So as we have already discussed in previous lectures that Indian Constitution presently has 25 parts and 12 schedules. So directive principles of state policy are enumerated in part 4 of the Indian Constitution, and they cover the articles from 36 to 51. Like fundamental, in the way fundamental rights are enumerated in the part 3rd of the Indian Constitution, in the same way directive principles of state policy are enumerated in part 4. In the previous lectures we have discussed that Indian Constitution is a bag of borrowing. We have bought different provisions from other constitutions. In the same way, directive principles of state policy were borrowed from the Irish Constitution. So, now the question is, what are these directive principles of state policy? These directive principles of state policy are basically instructions, recommendations, principles, strategy that the state has to keep in mind while formulating any law or the policy. ये ऐसे उसूल है, ये ऐसे instructions है जिसको basically government has to keep it in mind while formulating any law or formulating any policy. तो ये जो directive principles of state policy है, इनको कहा जाता है कि these are basically constitutional instructions or the instrument of instructions for the state. Directive principles of state policy जो है, they are non-justiciable in nature. If you recall, I have told you that fundamental rights are justiciable in nature. Justiciable in the nature in the sense that if any of your fundamental right is violated, you can go to the court for its enforcement. But since directive principles of state policy are non-justiciable in nature, so you cannot go to the court and the court cannot enforce directive principles of state policy when they are violated. So what was the logic behind directive principles of state policy? The framers of our constitution aimed at establishing India as a welfare state. Well, you have to distinguish between welfare state and a police state. Police state का क्या काम होता है? To maintain law and order. But welfare state, apart from maintaining law and order, welfare state also keeps in mind the socio and economic development of the people. So, directive principles of state policy aim at establishing social and economic democracy. If you recall, when we were discussing fundamental rights, I have told you that fundamental rights are aimed at establishing political democracy. But the directive principles of state policy, they are aimed at establishing social and economic democracy. Now let us see the classification of directive principles of state policy. Our constitution does not provide any classification, but the constitutional experts have given us the classification of directive principles of state policy. My dear students, directive principles of state policy can be classified into three categories. One, socialistic principles. Two, Gandhian principles. Three, liberal principles. Socialistic principles are those directive principles which reflect the ideology of socialism. Gandhian principles are those principles which reflect the ideology of Mahatma Gandhi. And liberal principles are those principles which reflect the ideology of liberalism. So, socialistic principles, for example, socialistic principles में आता है Article 39, which provides that the state shall try to minimize the inequalities in income, facilities and opportunities. For example, Article 38. इसी तरीके से आपका आएगा इसमें Article 41. Article 38 provides for that the state shall try to minimize inequalities in income, opportunities and facilities. Article 41 says right to work. And इसी तरीके से Gandhian principles में Article 40 आएगा. Article 40 provides for the organization of village panchayats, or I would say local self-governments. इसी तरीके से इसमें आता है Article 46 to promote the social and to promote the economic and educational interests of SCs, STs and other backward classes. इसी तरीके से liberal principles में आएगा Article 44 which provides for uniform civil code. इसी तरीके से Article 51 to establish good relations and peace at international level. So as far as socialistic principles are concerned, as I have cited the example of Article 38, which provides that the state shall try to minimize the inequalities in income, opportunities and facilities. इसी तरीके से Article 41 which provides for right to work. But you cannot compel the state to enforce these principles. आप state को compel नहीं कर सकोगे, because मैंने आपको already कहा है these directive principles are non-justiciable in nature. But on the one hand, they are non-justiciable in nature, but on the other hand, Article 37 provides that they are fundamental in the governance of the country. So the state has to keep in mind. These directive principles of state policy while formulating any law or policy. So, as far as the Gandhian principles are concerned, for example, Article 40 provides for organization of village panchayats, which was done by 73rd Constitutional Amendment 1992, and Article 46, which provides for educational and economic interest, to promote educational and economic interests of SCs, STs and other backward classes. And you know, in different government jobs and for the admission in educational institutions, there is a reservation policy for these groups. And recently, in 2019, by 103rd Constitutional Amendment, another provision was added which provides for reservation to economically weaker sections. So as far as liberal principles are concerned, I have cited the example of Article 44, which provides for uniform civil code. The present day regime, which is the BJP regime, has this proposal in its consideration, but they have not brought the proposal in the parliament yet. But there are sources which have told that BJP is trying to bring this uniform civil code, and it was in the election manifesto of BJP in 2019 that they are going to bring UCC. इसी तरीके से Article 51 है, which provides for the promotion of international peace and international relations. So these are liberal principles, these are Gandhian principles, and these are socialistic principles. But you cannot compel the state to enforce any of them. But on the other hand, state has the moral responsibility, moral obligation, and as Article 37 provides that these are fundamental in the governance of the country. Now let us see Now let us see, has any of the directive principle been implemented in the Indian polity or in the Indian state? All the Indian states, all the states in India have done land reforms, and in Jammu and Kashmir we had land to the tiller policy, which was the land reform in Jammu and Kashmir. And if we see organization of village panchayats, we have three-tier panchayat raj system across India, and uniform civil code was in the election manifesto of the BJP, and they are going to bring it, but there are certain apprehensions by the minorities. That is why they are avoiding to bring it. So let's try to relook what we have done. Today we have discussed the directive principles of state policy, in which I have told you that they are enumerated in part 4 of the Indian Constitution. Article cover होता है 36 से 51 तक, and then they have been borrowed from Irish Constitution, and they are basically constitutional instructions or recommendations or instrument of instructions. The state has to keep these directive principles in mind while formulating any policy or any law. Thank you.